Latin King Chief, Rudy Rangel Jr., aka Kato, was a big-time drug dealer, who was feared on the streets of Chicago. Margarito Flores Jr. and his twin brother Pedro were also big-time drug dealers, but no one, and I do mean no one, on the streets of Chicago were scared of them. This is the story of the cartel twins versus a kidnapper, backed by a dirty cop. The Flores twins' big homie, Kato, was murdered in June 2003. In September 2003, the two men who pulled Pedro's car over had looked like cops. But moments later, face down in the back of a windowless van, his hands and feet zip-tied, Flores realized he'd been tricked. At 22, he had been quietly working with his twin brother, Margarito, to create the most successful drug-dealing partnership in Chicago's history. Now, hogtied, his diamond-studded cell phone out of reach, Flores was powerless. All he could do was whisper a prayer. "Don't worry," one of his captors told him. "Once we get the money, we're going to cut you loose." The Flores twins would come to believe a man they thought was their friend, Saul Rodriguez, was behind the kidnapping. They had known Rodriguez for a few years, and at the time of the kidnapping, as Pedro Flores rode to his uncertain fate, they had plans to go with Rodriguez to Las Vegas to see a welterweight title match. And yes, for those that have viewed previous episodes in our series, Killing King Kato, the fight referenced in the Chicago Sun-Times is the Oscar de la Hoya vs. Shane Mosley fight, where Margarito took Kato's widow, Valerie, on a trip to help her grieve her dead husband by fucking the shit out of her. Rodriguez arranged the tickets. The twins and Rodriguez were all big-time drug dealers, but the similarities ended there. While the twins were loath to resort to violence, Rodriguez reveled in it, according to a Sun-Times review of court records and interviews with law enforcement and underworld figures. At the time, the kidnapping in September 2003 might have seemed like Rodriguez's knockout blow to the twins. But 11 years after Pedro Flores was snatched from an alley behind his family's southwest side home, he and his brother appear to have been playing a longer, smarter game. Rope-a-dope. Rodriguez grew up on the south side, where he ran with a street gang called La Raza. By the time Pedro Flores was kidnapped, Rodriguez had organized several kidnappings and personally participated in the abduction, torture, and murder of another drug dealer. If he wasn't ripping off his rivals, he was setting them up. He had a sweet deal with the cops. Rodriguez not only sold his own large amounts of heroin and cocaine. When he tipped the Chicago police off to his rivals' stashes, he also got paid for every kilo the cops recovered. In the 4 years leading up to 2000, Rodriguez netted $800,000 in fees for his police tips, a figure that likely made him the department's highest paid employee. His handler, narcotics officer Glenn Llewellyn, became his partner in crime, tipping him off about police operations and using his badge to carry out kidnappings at Rodriguez's behest. Emboldened by the police protection, Rodriguez became a boxing promoter and branched into real estate, building a strip of townhomes in the Brighton Park neighborhood and investing in a Nevada golf course development. But he took wild risks. A notorious womanizer, he slept with his flunkies' wives and regularly partied in Vegas, where he laundered money and had all the perks of a high roller. Nobody around him was safe. He had his best friend killed. Even a pal, whom he'd once helped escape from a Mexican prison, then set up in the drug business, became a target. If experience had taught Rodriguez that violence and double-crossing provided big rewards, it taught the Flores twins something else. From a young age, they were groomed for a life amid drug world royalty. When they were just 8, the twins rode with their father as he drove from Mexico to Chicago, in a vehicle packed with marijuana. Their dad went to prison, and their older brother, Armando, took over the family business. Then he got in trouble with the law too, so the twins learned the value of discretion. They started out as customers of Rodriguez, purchasing 15 to 20 kilos at a time. But through their father, they had a link directly to the Mexican cartels. Soon, the amounts of marijuana, cocaine and heroin they would be moving would dwarf anything Rodriguez had ever seen. Before they turned 25, they controlled the Sinaloa cartel's distribution network across the Midwest and into Canada, moving an estimated $1.8 billion in drugs through Chicago. With the near monopoly of Chicago's drug supply came riches and toys, custom chopper motorcycles, Lexuses, and Bentleys, and their own real estate empire. With that typical, drug dealer extravagance though, came some uncommon restraint. Where lesser dealers might have settled unpaid debts with bullets, the Flores twins simply cut bad debtors off, to avoid police attention. They did not cut off fingers to teach people about paying, said a source, intimately familiar with the brothers' methods. But that restraint would turn into a reputation for weakness that Rodriguez would exploit. I know people who were terrified of Rodriguez. His reputation was a no-nonsense, trigger-happy kind of dude, said attorney Joseph the Shark Lopez, who has represented dozens of players in Chicago's drug world. The Flores brothers were just drug dealers, gentlemen, drug dealers. They were afraid of him. Rodriguez met the twins in the early 2000s at Hoops, a basketball gym on the near west side. After 3 years of friendship, he was ready to pounce. He assembled a crew out of central casting. In addition to the crooked cop, Llewellyn, there was a suburban mom, whose day job was driving an ambulance, but who also acted as a drug courier, and once arranged the kidnapping of her own grandmother. She cashed in on the kidnapping, twice. After family members paid the ransom, the woman comforted her unwitting grandmother, telling her grandmother that she had paid the ransom herself, and would need to be repaid. Rodriguez's muscle came from the wrecking crew, 3 oversized brothers named Manny, Hector, and Jorge Uriarte. Rounding up the bunch was Fares Umar, a heavyset thug who hosted the crew at his Al Capone-themed wedding. The crew had been watching the twins' daily routines for some time when, in the summer of 2003, one of the twins' associates tipped Rodriguez about their movements. The plan was for Umar and Llewellyn to disguise themselves as undercover cops, riding in a green Ford Crown Victoria they had tricked out with lights and sirens. It worked perfectly. When Pedro pulled up to the 3 flat where he lived with his brother, near Archer and Keeler, he spotted the fake cop car, did a U-turn, and parked in an alley. Moments later, after Pedro's brother and a pal left on motorcycles, Llewellyn and Umar pulled up in the Crown Vic, frisked Pedro, and tossed him into a panel van, which headed to a home in west suburban Burbank, owned by one of the crew members. At the home, the crew tied the blindfolded Pedro to a chair in the basement, and kept him there for 24 hours. A pet parrot, trained by the kidnappers, kept him company. "Fuck you," the parrot squawked. Rodriguez came by but was discreet, since he feared Pedro Flores could identify him. He left the negotiations to his crew, who reassured Flores he'd be okay if his brother came through with the ransom, 100 kilos of cocaine, worth at least $1.5 million. At first, Margarito Flores did not come through. Threatened with the murder of his twin, Margarito showed cold-blooded detachment by trying to cheat the kidnappers with a load of weak cocaine. Only after a furious Pedro Flores called his brother, reminding him his life was on the line, did Margarito make good on the ransom, and Pedro was freed.
Shortly after Pedro was released, the twins traveled to Las Vegas to see Oscar de la Hoya fight Shane Mosley at the MGM Grand. Rodriguez had arranged for their tickets and hotel. Though the twins suspected Rodriguez, they said nothing when they partied with him at a nightclub after the fight. When Margarito Flores lost money at the gambling tables, Rodriguez was only too happy to lend him a big wad of cash. And that, for a few years, was that. But our story is far from over. I have more to tell about the Flores twins and the crybaby killer, but before I do, please put some pressure on that like button and subscribe for more videos from us. If Pedro's kidnapping was not forgotten, it became a footnote, just one in a series of wild escapades that would mark a dizzy 5-year spell of excess for Rodriguez and the Flores twins. By the time they were federally indicted in Milwaukee, in 2005, the twins had already fled to Mexico. They grew their empire in exile, gaining in stature after they enjoyed personal audiences with the boss of the powerful Sinaloa cartel, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, himself. Flown into meetings at El Chapo's secret mountaintop lair, the twins secured the rights to distribute cocaine by the ton through Chicago. Back in Chicago, Rodriguez was still playing a lower level game, His crew eventually ripped off at least 29 other dealers. In one particularly ruthless turn, a cartel hired Rodriguez to investigate a robbery, not knowing Rodriguez had done it himself. Rodriguez happily found an innocent suspect to torture. Rodriguez wasn't finished with the Flores twins, either. While they were in hiding in Mexico, he kidnapped their top courier, and stole $4 million more. When Rodriguez's crew members found hidden loot at a Flores stash house, they shouted, "Bingo!" Then, it all came crashing down. Rodriguez's crew was busted, in a Drug Enforcement Administration sting, when they were robbing a Joliet area warehouse, that Rodriguez believed was loaded with the twins' drugs, sources say. The Flores twins' run came to an end when they found themselves caught in the middle of a deadly cartel war between El Chapo, and a rival boss they'd also dealt with. Calculating to the end, at the height of their power, the twins made a business decision to turn themselves in, taking the monumental decision to become the biggest drug snitches in US history. The twins had much to offer. They risked their lives recording cartel leaders in incriminating conversations. And, they taped El Chapo in a phone call that tied him to a heroin deal on Chicago's West Side.
Nigga, West Side!
Dozens of indictments flowed from their cooperation. The feds rewarded them with a blockbuster deal. Their family was placed in witness protection, and the twins were sentenced to just 14 years in prison. They were recently released, and likely have millions of dollars in drug money stashed away somewhere. Their cartel wives were both sentenced to years in prison for laundering drug money, so they got some new bitches with big fake titties. Rodriguez also cut a deal with prosecutors. But, all he could offer was his testimony against Llewellyn, the corrupt cop, and a handful of lesser dealers. So following his capture, he tried one last trick. Incarcerated at the downtown Metropolitan Correctional Center in 2008, he managed to get himself appointed as an orderly in the segregated housing unit. Inside the unit, held in solitary confinement, was one of the cartel bosses the Flores twins had secretly recorded. The boss, Vicente Zambada Niebla, the playboy son of El Chapo's second in command, wanted the twins dead, and was prepared to pay for information. Rodriguez told what he knew, sharing the intel that helped his crew kidnap Pedro Flores all those years ago. Zambada paid Rodriguez's lawyer $6,000. But, Rodriguez's involvement with the cartel chief ended up costing him far more. Once one of Chicago's most feared criminals, Saul Rodriguez, cried like a baby before he was sentenced to 40 years in prison for leading a ruthless kidnapping crew. Rodriguez was involved in the killings of at least 3 people, including his best friend, federal prosecutors say. The sentence was the maximum Rodriguez faced, under a deal with prosecutors. Rodriguez sobbed for more than 10 minutes, brushing away tears with tissues, as he apologized to his victims, and his family.
Man, I ain't crying because of this story. I got allergies. But that was pretty sad.
The crybaby killer said, "I don't want to do bad, no more." Rodriguez said, he found God in jail, and wanted to become an ordained minister behind bars. His attorneys asked for the minimum of 30 years in prison, but U.S. District Judge John Gottschall said that would be a disservice to the victims. Before the sentencing, the sister of one of Rodriguez's murder victims urged Gottschall to give him the stiffest prison term possible. Angelica Lovano said Rodriguez had pretended to mourn her brother, Juan Lovano, at his funeral in June 2000. Rodriguez ordered Lovano's shooting in Cicero because Lovano dated Rodriguez's ex-girlfriend, prosecutors said. "Every time I think about it, it makes my stomach churn," Angelica Lovano said. "Why did you take his life away?" she asked Rodriguez, who sat at the defense table in an orange jail uniform with his feet shackled. "My brother looked up to you like a brother." A kidnapping victim's relative also read a statement, in which he described the terror of being abducted for an $800,000 ransom in 2003. Jimmy Lopez, who owned a North Side rim shop, asked his kidnappers to call his friend, Rodriguez, to pay the ransom. Little did he know that Rodriguez arranged the abduction. Lopez recalled trying not to vomit in the plastic bag his kidnappers placed over his head because he feared he would suffocate. None of this is easy to forget, Lopez's statement said, adding that he hopes the government will order Rodriguez to repay the $800,000 that Lopez spent on his ransom. Lopez's statement was in jarring contrast to the testimony given by Rodriguez's former attorney, Jeff Steinbach, who told the judge that Rodriguez found new faith in jail. He acknowledged Rodriguez sunk to the lowest depths with his shocking crimes. But he said Rodriguez now wants only to make amends to his victims and underwent a sincere religious conversion. Steinbach recalled visiting Rodriguez in jail and having the criminal take his hands and pray for the recovery of Steinbach's young granddaughter, who was suffering from leukemia. Steinbach urged the judge to sentence Rodriguez to 30 years in prison to give him hope to continue on a path toward redemption. He has never stopped crying, he has never stopped aching, and never will.
Man, I ain't crying because of this story. I got allergies. But that was pretty sad. The kid's not talking, man.